Fauve is an effect plugin that collects fragments from the incoming audio and plays them back, though not always in a faithful way. This can happen on both micro and macro dimensions, giving Fauve the capability to dismantle and rearrange audio segments in all kinds of different ways, from randomic slicing all the way to digital distortion. It is the third plugin of the Totem series, a collection of plugins based on unconventional processing capabilities, each with a strong character and minimal interface design, encouraging experimentation and sweet accidents. At first, Fauve listens to the incoming audio and analyzes its amplitude. Each time a zero crossing occurs, it creates a new fragment and stores it in its memory. These fragments are then grouped into what we call collections. So when we talk about fragments, we are talking about the single audio material in between two upward zero crossings, while on the other hand, a collection is a defined number of subsequent fragments. By default, collections are played back with no amplitude windowing envelope, and that is because of the zero crossing based process. Fauve listening behavior can be set in the leftmost part of the interface. We can use the length parameter to set the size of each collection. If we set the length to 100, Fauve is going to store 100 new fragments into a new collection and then move on to collecting the upcoming next 100 and so on. The size of a collection is the fundamental unit driving the whole process behind Fauve. In fact, Fauve has no other notion of timing, and its behavior is strongly determined by the nature of incoming audio. This is the reason why the same values can result in dramatically different outcomes depending on the input signal. That being said, we can use the floor buttons, the ones located above the length dial, to establish a minimum absolute length threshold for each collection in milliseconds. This means that we can discard all of those collections with a length less than the floor value. The available values are 25, 50, and 100 milliseconds. While the leftmost button equals to no minimum length, essentially letting each collection through. On the lower part of the listening block, we find the stuck parameter. This can be used to set the chance of skipping new collections, causing Fauve to arbitrarily bring back older ones instead of storing new fragments. A value of 0 equals to always refreshing the collections pool, while an increasing value makes newer collections less likely to be captured. A value of 100% will get Fauve to endlessly loop through the same collection stored up until that moment. The area at the center of the UI is where we can control how Fauve plays back these stored collections. We can have it going through them in a linear way or alter the reading process completely. The disorder parameter is what allows us to change the collection's playback order. At 0%, collections get played back in subsequent order. The more we increase its value, the more we introduce randomness for Fauve to choose the next collection to read. Next, we find the repeat dial. Increasing its value raises the chances that the currently played back collection is going to get looped before moving on to the next one. A value of 100% means that the collection is going to get looped endlessly and Fauve is never gonna move on. The freeze button is a shortcut for getting to 100%, which can be useful to create a prominent interception in the playback flow. The rate parameter simply controls the collection's playback speed. Notice how reading at different rates not only alters the collection's pitch, but also affects the speed at which Fauve moves between them. The Abscence parameter is used to change the amplitude behavior during the playback process. Moving the dial to the left accesses the Randomize mode. When in this mode, we can assign increasingly random amplitude to each collection, which can be useful for introducing organic and dynamic variations. On the other hand, turning the dial to the right accesses the Drop mode, which sets an increasing number of collections' amplitude to 0. A 100% value equals to all collections who have 0 amplitude, essentially causing the playback to be silent. An additional pro tip: drop mode is especially useful when working with fastly repeating collections to create a kind of disintegration like digital distortion. Last but not least, at the top left of the playback area we find the Envelope button, an utility used to introduce a subtle windowing envelope to each collection. The final section is where the overall intervention of Fauve can be calibrated. Before moving forward, it is important to note that Fauve has no real mix or dry-wet parameter. In fact, every time it plays back some collections, it replaces the original signal, which we call source, with its own intervention, which we call process. The two LEDs icons above the monitor dial indicate what we are currently listening to on the left and right output channels. A fully lit up LED means that we are listening to process on the respective channel. And the opposite is true for source when the LED is empty. Because of several possible behaviors, process and source can easily overlap, which is also something that gets reflected on the LEDs. The Mirage parameter is what sits at the core of the whole plugin. This dial is used to set a chance for Fauve to actually play back the stored collection, essentially dictating if any action needs to happen at all. Each time a new collection gets stored, Fauve checks the Mirage value and decides whether to play back something or not. At 0%, it always keeps quiet and lets the original signal through completely. At 100%, we are going to be able to hear only the collection's playback. On the left side, we find the sync buttons. These can be used to set how Fauve should act on the left and right channel respectively. When set on stereo, the upper one, it means that the two channels are analyzed independently, each with its own set of random values being calculated separately. On the other hand, switching to mono causes the two channels to act in sync. However, this has nothing to do with the stereo image of the output, which stays consistent with the audio source. The Smoo dial controls the smoothness of the transition between source and process. Increasing this value causes the two to crossfade when Fauve is passing from one to another. Smoo can play a major role when using Fauve to add subtle textures to incoming audio. The lean parameter is used to balance Fauve's action between the left and the right channels. Moving the dial to one side is going to subtract the respective chance value from the opposite channel. For instance, moving lean all the way to the left is going to allow source through the right channel completely, even with a 100% Mirage value. Playing around with different values allows to distribute Fauve's intervention nicely towards one side or the other, but it can also be used to disable it completely on one channel. At the bottom of the right section we find the monitor dial, which can be used to balance the volume of either source or process in the final output. However, as we told before, Fauve has no mix control, and this must not be confused with the dry-wet style of parameter. In fact, if we move the dial all the way to the source side, we can hear how the audio gets cut off when Fauve starts the playback. This is because we are only listening to source, not dialing down Fauve's action in any way, which keeps replacing the source regardless of the monitoring volume. Fauve is an insert effect by design, and monitor is a creative parameter which can be used to calibrate the dynamic further. Finally, the button on the lower right of the interface is the sustain parameter. When not active, Fauve detects when there's no incoming audio and fades out its playback accordingly. However, when turning on sustain, this is no longer true and the collection's playback doesn't stop. On the other hand, no incoming audio equals no zero crossing to analyze, therefore no new fragments get stored in any collection. Fauve is one-of-a-kind sound design tool, which can do wonders in any kind of electronic music context and beyond. It can add layers of intricate textures on drums, synthetic timbres and acoustic instruments. Its processing pipeline makes it possible to even use it as a unique wave shaping effect, a drone generator, and so on.